Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Bianca Durrani, President and CEO of Aperio Philanthropy. It's my pleasure to welcome you today. Aperio Philanthropy is a full-service nonprofit consulting firm created by a group of fundraisers who wanted to make fundraising simpler, faster, and smarter. We work with organizations around the country, providing strategic advisory, project support, and embedded fundraising support to accelerate revenue growth for their missions. We are thrilled to be partnering with New York University on today's webinar series. For the past year or so, we have been exploring how philanthropy can drive change in a number of sectors, and today's webinar will focus on the role of philanthropy in advancing women's rights. I'm going to turn it over now to Michelle D'Amico from NYU to introduce our moderator and panel.
Great. Thanks so much, Bianca. Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle D'Amico, and I'm the Director of Continuing Education and Public Programs at the NYU SPS Center for Global Affairs, or CGA. Since its founding, our goal at CGA has been to prepare global citizens to make a positive impact in the world. We do this through a variety of activities, including our 2 graduate programs, one in Global Affairs and another MS in Global Security, Conflict, and Cybercrime. We also offer a wide variety of skills and knowledge-based continuing education courses, and of course, offer public events such as this that expand upon the topics that we cover in our classrooms. We are very proud to be home to the George H. Heyman Jr. Program for Fundraising and Philanthropy. Through our open enrollment courses and certificate in fundraising and new certificate in digital fundraising, we offer professionally oriented continuing education options for those looking to either enter or grow within the fundraising field. Our courses are taught by practitioner faculty who bring their vast expertise, experience, and networks to the classroom. We'll send out a follow-up message to all attendees, so please feel free to reach out with any questions you may have. Additionally, we have reserved some time at the end of today's event for questions from the audience, so please feel free to use the Q&A tool to submit your questions. We are very excited to host today's event. It's an important and critical topic, and we're honored to be joined by this stellar and impressive panel. You'll hear more about these phenomenal change makers shortly, but first I'd like to introduce my fabulous colleague, Dr. Sylvia Maier, who serves as Academic Director and Clinical Associate Professor here at the Center for Global Affairs. She also leads our Global Gender Studies concentration within our graduate program. Sylvia, the virtual floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Michelle, and thank you, Bianca, for this wonderful partnership and bringing us together for today's conversation, which could not be timelier, and that is how philanthropy can advance women's rights. As we all know, those of us on this call and beyond, the last 5 to 10 years have witnessed a global backlash against women's and LGBT rights. Women's rights around the globe are under attack, in particular, our rights to reproductive freedom, in particular in this country, our rights to abortion, our economic mobility is under threat. So overall, our most fundamental rights are under attack. The pandemic over the last 2.5 years, likewise, has disproportionately affected women economically, physically, and psychologically. And as many of us know, we're still recovering from that. However, ever the optimist, at the same time, feminist movements around the world are gaining traction and are fighting for systemic change. And most importantly, in Iran, as we speak, women are fighting fiercely, bravely, courageously against the theocracy that has relegated them to second-class citizenship. In Argentina and other current countries of South America, women are valiantly fighting against domestic violence. And donors of all kinds, individuals, foundations, and companies want to be part and are part of finding solutions to these systemic forms of discrimination against women. Nonetheless, and now I'm going to share with you a number that may shock some of you. According to the Lilly family's School of Philanthropy's Women and Girls Index, less than 2% of charitable giving goes to supporting women's and girls' organizations. So, as you can see, the conversation that we're going to have over the last hour could not be timelier. So today's panel will explore how can we drive change? How can we drive more philanthropic resources to the fight for gender justice? And what role can each one of us play? And what might we need to approach differently? And in consideration of the nonprofit leaders and fundraisers in our audience, we'll also touch on how you can engage a diverse and dynamic base of philanthropists in your work in this area. Now it is my incredible pleasure to introduce our most distinguished panel of fierce and fabulous feminist advocates and activists in alphabetical order. Katie Chavez. KD is the developments director at UltraViolet, a community of people that drives feminist cultural and political change. They believe that true leadership is based in reciprocity, healing, and intergenerational relationships with each other and the land. Prior to joining UltraViolet, KD led fundraising efforts at leading organizations such as the ACLU and Planned Parenthood. Next, my wonderful colleague, Wendy Doyle. Wendy is the president and CEO of United We, an organization that advances women's economic and civic leadership to make meaningful change. Throughout her tenure at United We, Wendy has led the organization to invest in research, advocacy, and policy solutions to remove economic barriers for women. Prior to United We, Wendy served as the executive vice president of development at Catholic Charities of Northeast Kansas. Next, the wonderful Françoise Girard. Françoise is the Chief Executive Officer at Feminism Makes Us Smarter. I agree. She is an author, advocate, and expert on women's health, human rights, sexuality, HIV and AIDS, and feminist movements globally. For over 20 years, she has advocated for women's rights and gender justice in close partnerships with feminist activists from Latin America, Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and Eastern Europe. And she has held positions at the Open Society Foundations at the International Women's Health Coalition. And last but definitely not least, my wonderful colleague, Rufaro Kangai. Rufaro is the director of individual major gifts at the Global Fund for Women. She's a recognized leader in supporting movement building and grant making with over 10 years of experience developing, managing, and implementing programs that promote women's and girls' rights globally. She's a seasoned cross-cultural communicator, bridging global funders and local networks of civil society organizations and public policy leaders. With extensive frontline experience implementing programs that advance the sexual and reproductive health and rights of women and girls. Rufaro formerly served organizations such as the International Child Rescue Institute and the Public Health Institute. Please join me in welcoming our wonderful panel. Now, let's get us started. Question for all, and I'd like to direct the first question to you, KD, followed by Françoise, Wendy, and Rufaro. Let's each, I'm going to invite you all to each share a little about your lens on the conversation that we'll be having today. Could you tell us a little bit more about your vision for gender justice? What are you working towards, KD?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm so excited to be in community with you all. So my vision and lens definitely comes from Indigenous lifeways. And I would say that my vision for a gender just future really renews our connections, repairs historic harms and intergenerational trauma, revives place-based practices and knowledge and self-determination. And I like to say that every day I work towards creating a world beyond patriarchy where we can all live freely and thrive.
Here, KD. Thank you so much. Françoise, what is your vision?
Well, as someone who was trained as a lawyer, I do tend to focus on rights as one approach, and in particular, the rights of all people, but including those who identify as women, as well as trans persons, to control their body, their sexuality, and to be free of violence, coercion, and abuse. And that includes access to education about sexuality, about our body, of course, abortion rights, and a range of conditions which allow for reproductive justice, as the Black feminist movement in the United States has made so clear that it is one thing to have choice, but how can you exercise this choice in full justice, I think is incredibly important. And my focus has been global, and so therefore I'm very interested in issues of solidarity between transnational feminists and how we can work across borders to advance those rights.
Thank you so much for sharing, Francois. So important, transnational solidarity and bodily autonomy really as the core from which most of our rights emanate. Couldn't agree with you more. Wendy, please, would you share with us your vision?
Sure. Our vision is really for women to fully participate in the economy and fully participate in democracy. And we do that by building out and investing in evidence-based research, utilizing that research to identify upward economic mobility opportunities in a nonpartisan manner, and then look at how we can fully engage women and educate them about how to participate in civic leadership.
Thank you so much, Wendy, for sharing. And if I may say so, your organization really has its work cut out for itself, especially under the current dire economic conditions, still recovering from COVID economically, and with the current inflation rate and prices going up around the world. But you can do it, Wendy, I know. And last but not least, Rufaro, would you share your vision with us, please?
Sure. So our vision as the Global Fund for Women is about shifting power to those who have it and those who do not. And majority are women and girls. And we believe our vision is that power shifting through supporting movements, collective action, women coming together all over the world on different issues that impact women. Women are impacted on issues like climate change, access to technology, reproductive health and rights, economic justice, and many other issues. And they are capable, strong, passionate, well-adept women who are, and their organizations who are leading movements. And there's a need for philanthropy to invest in those movements. So our vision is seeing all those movements having adequate resources, technical assistance, and supported to do the work they are doing really well in advancing women human rights in their communities, lasting beyond our lifetime. At Global Fund for Women, we're looking at how generational sustainability is important. We've seen how they've been rollbacks on the work that our foremothers, the work they did in the 60s and 70s. There's a rollbacks on that, and we would like that change to last beyond our generation.
Thank you so much for sharing, Rufaro. Intergenerational justice, sustainable intergenerational change really lies at the core, from what I hear you say, at your vision and your work. Going now from, so thank you all for sharing your vision, building this out, to the big picture now. Rufaro, may I call on you again, please, now? Could you share with us, and you already alluded to it a little bit, but could you share a little bit about your sense of where we are right now in the fight for gender justice globally? You alluded to a very intersectional, very intergenerational approach for sustainable change. Where are we on that globally right now?
Thank you so much. I would like to start by echoing some of the statements that you made in your opening statement, that we're experiencing some of the greatest opposition in women's human rights. And with a country like the United States, which was the model for democracy, we've seen the overturning of Roe versus Wade, and rollbacks on other groups like the LGBTQ community, racial justice. We've seen rollbacks on that. So it looks like a discouraging moment. And on the other hand, we also have women human rights defenders all over the world who are fighting for survival, fighting to stay alive. They are risking their lives every day to advance the well-being of women in their communities. Although it's discouraging, there are these rollbacks and opposition, it's also an encouraging time. We are seeing in the field of philanthropy, individuals like Melinda Gates speak out on the importance of supporting women's organization, women's movement. In the past, growing up, even when my parents and grandmothers were growing up, we did not see such influential, families that are tied to billions care. It was more about their fur coats and, material things. But we are seeing a rise in women who are well-resourced in the global north, who care about what's happening to women all over the world. So for me, that has been really encouraging. In addition to that, women are becoming bold. No matter which community, whether it's a remote, rural community in a place like Haiti, in a country like Haiti, women who want to be in politics are at risk for their lives. And I've seen encouraging movements where women are encouraging other women to be in politics, protecting them. Women are becoming bold and they're saying enough is enough, despite the 2% of resources that come to women's organizations. Women at every level and girls, we have in the environmental justice movements where young women leaders are all standing up and they're speaking out and they're coming together. I believe in the past, what weakened our efforts as women is there was division, lack of collaboration. But there's more collaboration more than ever. There's exchanging of knowledge. There's cultural humility where you're seeing feminists in the United States of America listen to learnings from feminists from a country like Mexico, listen to their wins and their approach with a willingness and an openness to, to adopt some of those practices. You're also seeing philanthropists being more thoughtful. When I started in the field of philanthropy, it was a top-down relationship with the philanthropists and the programs and power dynamics where we have the power, we have the resources. So it's our way or the highway. That is slowly shifting. It might not be where we want it to be right now, but I am encouraged with the change that we're seeing where philanthropists are listening more and building more trust and trust the experts that are in different countries. I'll end there and hand it back to you.
Thank you so much, Rufaru, for sharing and really for highlighting for us, the progress that is being made, despite all the backlashes, in various forms that we're facing in this country and globally, progress is being made. And you spotlighted for us, for instance, environmental justice movements, racial justice movements. In other words, the increasing partnerships and connections and mutual support of the various justice movements that all have human dignity and human equality at their core. So thank you so much for pointing this out and really kind of amplifying the voices for us. And I would now like to turn to Françoise and ask her to maybe build on what and add on to what Rufaru has shared with us, and that is where in other parts of the world do you see movements gaining traction, and maybe what strategies are working. Rufaru pointed out to us, that they are gaining traction. What has worked? What is working?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I see women's movements on the march everywhere. And women are at the forefront of so many movements for change, whether it's in Argentina fighting on violence against women, but also their abortion rights, which they obtained in December 2020. The same in Mexico. In Kenya, there's a huge movement activating for reproductive health services against violence. The same in South Africa. Sudan, the women were at the forefront of the movement for democracy. We see it today in Iran. I mean, women are, and young women in particular, are really on the front line. So I see a lot of exciting developments. What I don't see is the funding that needs to support those movements. As you pointed out, Sylvia, there's still very little money of all the charitable donations that are going to various organizations. There's still a tiny little fraction going to feminist movement and women's groups. That's true in the US. Those were the figures you were citing from the Lilly family report on women and girls. But it's also true at the global level. The Association for Women's Rights and Development puts out a regular report, and they say that of all the funding that's spent by governments and foundations across the world, less than 1%, it's even less globally, goes to women's movements. So on the one hand, we have the engine of change with this incredible, vibrant movement. And on the other hand, we have donors really, really very reluctant to devote the resources to what has been demonstrated to work. So there's an equation that doesn't quite work here, and we need to, I think the point of this panel is to try to urge donors to make up that difference and bridge that gap.
Thank you so much, Françoise, for this call to action. I will pick up on that a little bit later in the conversation because the numbers, really need to go up. And having a conversation about why there isn't more money flowing in the direction of women's rights and girls' rights advocacy, I think is a very important one to have. And how can we enhance engagement, for a cause, that we all feel so passionate about, and that is crucial for families and individuals, societies, communities, nations, if you will, economic prosperity. And which brings me to the question that I would now like to direct to Katie, if I may. Katie, given UltraViolet's work in driving feminist change, can you share some of the ways in which communities can reorient to a feminist economy?
Absolutely. So first of all, a feminist economy is completely, it has to go beyond policy and really aim at deep cultural change. So those are things like repairing historical violence and inequality with and in between countries, as some of my other folks have mentioned, across the oceans, addressing inequalities within households, eliminating gender-based violence, reversing climate change, ending mass incarceration, et cetera, et cetera. We really need to get to a point where our communities are valued, our community members are valued, and they are seen more than just economic production within our capitalist system. And that narrative shift is gonna have to be essential to our survival. So different ways that communities can reorient to a feminist economy include shifting away from extractive practices. So building state social infrastructure, looking at things like childcare, education, healthcare, which has been shown that is more effective in reducing public deficits and debt than austerity policies and things like boosting employment and earnings and economic growth. Of course, fostering gender equity, redressing critical economic inequalities to promote women as a political category, financial independence. And of course, we know that financial independence is a basic condition for recovery and liberation from gender-based violence. And so really incorporating that into violence prevention. So at UltraViolet, we're currently working on providing guidance for the care economy. We're also focused on minimum wage, student loan forgiveness, investments in affordable housing, child tax credit extensions, increase, of course, in COVID relief for state and local governments to support schools, and paid leave.
Thank you so much, Katie, for this. As you were speaking, as I was preparing for our panel earlier today and yesterday, I was trying to find, and I was semi-successful. I was trying to find the printout of the feminist economic recovery plans that were developed both by Hawaii and by Canada. And right now, in my pile of material, I could only find the one from Canada, but there is one for Hawaii as well. So no disrespect to Hawaii, it is there, and I will find it.
Yes.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and I was a co-author on that plan with
wow.
Actually with it was a group of Indigenous women that were living in Hawaii. So we actually authored and turned that plan around in 48 hours, believe it or not. So I'm also happy to drop the link for folks that may be interested in it. But yeah, it was a pleasure to work on that and get it out there for the world.
Fantastic. If you could drop it in the chat so we can distribute it to our audience, it would be fantastic. I had no idea you were the co-author. Well, 48 hours, women always get it done, right? No question. Lovely. Thank you so much, Katie, for sharing. And that brings us, to Wendy. And Wendy, Katie really highlighted for us the importance of bringing about sustainable economic change for increased independence and agency and autonomy and choice for women. And you're working in a very, very important space. Could you tell us a little bit more about your vision for a crucial aspect to bring about more women's independence, and that is women's civic participation, please? What does it look like and why does it matter?
Well, representation matters, especially when it comes to decision making. And women are sorely underrepresented at every level of government, local, city, county, state, and federal. And when we are lacking and underrepresented, that means the issues that are important to women to advance economically, like childcare, paid family and medical leave, paid equal pay for equal work, you are lacking that representation of really advocating for those issues and moving forward. At United we invested in some research to really, understand and peel back the layers of why we are so sorely underrepresented. And women tend to undervalue their experience and expertise and lack the confidence. Now, Rufaro mentioned that women are becoming more bold and utilizing their voice, and we definitely see that in our future generations that are coming up. But women are still lacking that confidence. And we have created an intervention to build on the confidence and called the Appointments Project, which really educates women about dipping their toe into policy work with the Appointments Project. And the Appointments Project educates women about how to serve by getting an appointment by an elected official at the city, county, and state level. And it is our hope that that intervention will build that confidence and encourage those women to want to go on and run for elected office, the city, county, and federal level. But representation matters to really advocate for those important issues that are impacting women, and we are sorely lacking representation.
Thank you so much, Wendy, really for driving that home, especially now with elections coming up in this country. I'm not an American citizen. I'm Austrian. I have only a green card, so I cannot vote, but everybody needs to get out and vote. It's, people say, vote is if your life depended on it. It does. And we are in a unique position now to elect more women to office in Georgia, in keeping Katie Hochul here in New York in office. So absolutely, our lives will depend on it, and that of our current and putative children. So thank you so much, Wendy, for sharing. I would now like to switch back a little bit, if I may, to the overarching theme of our conversation today, and that is, the role of philanthropy in all of this. Where does philanthropy come in? And if I may, I would like to start with KD and ask her to elaborate a little bit on how would you describe, in your experience, you're in the trenches, really, how would you describe the funding landscape for feminist movements?
Sure. So as several folks have mentioned, to date, most of our movements have achieved success with minimal philanthropic support. But I think, the funding landscape for the feminist movement is in a state of transition. I think the fundraising sector is always in a place of examining risk. However, in this post-world, I think literally the only risk is not investing in feminism and a gender-just movement. So it's important for everyone, I'm going to put it out there, please invest in the gender justice movement in order for us to have the future that we want and deserve. And I also want to underline that traditionally what has been seen as a risky investment really upholds forms of oppression like racism and misogyny, and that those with access to wealth are now only beginning to step outside of those traditional philanthropic, best practices. They're starting to give to frontline, BIPOC-led, non-legacy organizations. And they're the organizations that are closest to the struggle that have often been the bellwethers for the feminist movement and for democracy. So I think that now, in this crux point where we've come to a point where we know we need to be uncompromising, unapologetic, and deeply invest in our futures, we need to mobilize resources, and not just economic ones like grants and donations, but we also need to get to a place where we're leveraging our social capital to shift those narratives within our communities, pop culture, the media, as well as electing and supporting those with political power that will truly defend our communities. So, I think we're starting to get there, and I really urge everyone to kind of unlearn what has been just propped up by the sector for decades and decades.
Thank you so much for sharing, Katie, and in particular highlighting the absolute necessity of focusing on our social capital, using our social capital to bring about sustainable cultural change. Because again, we're deeply entrenched in culture wars, and right now, cultural prejudices, if you will, and stereotypes are being accepted at an alarming rate by an alarmingly large number of people around the world. So thank you for sharing, Katie, which brings me back to Wendy. Could I ask you, Wendy, now after Katie outlined kind of where we are in the funding landscape, when you are sitting down with an individual philanthropist, how do you describe the impact that they can have? How do you get them to open their wallet, so to speak?
Thank you for the question. Well, first of all, 51% of our population is represented here domestically by women. So if, a great investment in 51% of the population is, a great return on investment. Secondly, just getting the individual comfortable with less visible and more at systems level change is really hard for an individual to understand. So really explaining the impact of a policy change by investing in that policy change can impact hundreds of thousands of lives, women and men. But it is a great return on investment. I would also get the individual comfortable with, kind of piggybacking on what Katie mentioned, is investing in, a political campaign for a woman to run for elected office. Men are extremely, skilled at making that investment, but women tend to hold back and are concerned about investing in a candidate running for elected office. And again, the power of the vote, as you mentioned, Sylvia, is another place that I would encourage an individual philanthropist to also not only invest their resources from a financial perspective, but also their voice and showing up and advocating for the issues that are important to them.
Thank you so much, Wendy, for sharing. And really also, as Katie did, sharing with us that all too often and I just took notes as you were speaking, that investing in women's candidates and investing in women's and girls' issues is still by some considered as a risky investment. And, that brings us, to what Katie and you, Françoise, and others, Rufaro, were sharing about the needs to unthink and unlearn and to bring about, cultural changes about our thinking of, what makes a good leader and what are issues that deserve our financial investment that really are at the root cause for economic and a society's prosperity in the widest sense. So thank you so much for driving that home. Françoise, could I please ask you to share with us your thoughts in your experience? What are the best ways that philanthropists and funders can advance gender justice, and what pitfalls, equally importantly, should they avoid?
Yes, and I'm sure the other panelists can add to this because we all know the evidence. What I'm going to say is actually evidence-based. It's not just my essay. So, because there's actually been quite a lot of research on what works to advance women's rights. So the number one factor, and that's indisputable, is autonomous feminist movements. They are the ones that will move the needle. And then there's been studies in multiple countries over 40 years in the developing world as well as in the North. And the answer is feminist movements ultimately are critical to moving the needle on women's rights. So they must be funded. And by that, we mean women's groups, Black feminists, Indigenous feminists, lesbian feminists, women fighting for equal pay, women fighting for abortion rights and coalitions. That's who we're talking about. And if you as a donor don't know who they are, then it's important to turn to those who do know. The women's funds, and I'm pointing at Rufaro, Global Fund for Women is one of those funds that know very well who's doing that work on the ground on a number of issues in a vast number of countries. So whether you're in Cincinnati or you're in Bulgaria or Mexico, women's funds exist in all these places and can help you direct your funding appropriately. And there's two networks. One of them is the Women's Funding Network, that covers US and international women's funds. And there's another network called Prospera, Prospera, that covers international women's funds. So those are amazing resources, and they can receive your funding and then re-grant it. Now, what kind of funding is a very, very critical question, because if you're going to fund feminist groups, any size of gift, of course, is welcome, but you must give them unrestricted funding. You must give them flexible funding. And I'll explain why, but otherwise you will divert them from their work. You will keep them busy with your reporting requirements and your conditions. And that's not what you should be doing with your money. You should empower them, give them the room to work their magic and do the work they're already doing. Preferably long-term support, multi-year grants, based on a partnership. Like, you want to be on a journey with that feminist organization, and go through with them all the twists and turns of victory and defeat. I mean, for example, when I was at the International Women's Health Coalition, we funded the women's movement in Argentina working to legalize abortion, to decriminalize abortion. We funded them for 15 years. And we had a lot of twists and turns, and we had a near win in 2018 that was defeated in the last minute in Parliament. But we continued to fund them, and ultimately victory came in 2020. So you have to have a long-term partnership with them. And what else? It was already mentioned. Use other assets you have as a donor beyond the check, beyond the grant. So is there a speaking opportunity at a conference that you could recommend this feminist organization speak at? So offer them that seat. Is there a media source that's covering a conference, and you could point them to a feminist group that should be interviewed? Are there training opportunities or fellowship opportunities that you have access to, that you could offer to that organization or to its leaders? There's many ways to support feminist movements in ways that don't burden them. And the ways that do burden them are when you put restrictions on your funding, such as saying you can't use it for rent or salaries or equipment or administrative costs, or you can't use it to travel or to go to a conference. That's all very unhelpful. That actually assumes that the work gets done by little elves who are not paid and don't have an office, and also that coalitions of feminists don't need to meet to strategize. Quite the contrary. I mean, the success of feminist organizations has been in the coalition building and the solidarity. So you need to let them use the money for whatever they need. Also, avoid lots of reporting requirements. Receive their annual report, receive their annual plan, their audited statements if they have any. Don't ask them for monthly reports. Don't burden them with requirements that will actually divert them from doing the work, and also will stop making them accountable to their community, but turn them into, accountants to the donor. That's not what you want to do.
So helpful, Françoise. Thank you so much for highlighting these key points for us. Unrestricted funding, play the long game, and see if there are other assets that one can make available. But most importantly, unrestricted funding, focusing on transnational coalition building and solidarity, and listening to the folks on the ground, what is actually needed. Which brings me to Rufaro. Rufaro, you are in the trenches of fundraising as well. And funders are increasingly looking to participatory grant making as a pathway to social change. Could you share with us a little bit more, what does that entail, participatory grant making, and how can and does it advance women's rights?
Thank you so much for that question, and definitely here to the statements that Francois just mentioned on how to effectively support women's movement. So participatory grant making is something that really excites me. It's acknowledging that the philanthropist does not know everything. And it looks at the grantee partner as a co-collaborator. It's about co-creating. What's the traditional approaches to philanthropy is, the investors or the stakeholders in a foundation get together. They sit down and talk about what their vision is, what they want to see for the next few years, and they all create strategic areas to focus on. So that's really not a participatory grant making. It's people sitting without context on what's happening locally and making a decision on how to support communities without actually engaging the leadership or the movements in those communities who are there every day. This is so important to me because I am a global citizen. I lived in the global north and the global south. And when I started this work and learning about HIV and AIDS, I was in the US, I saw statistics, and I had that approach. And when I started working in Zimbabwe, I was educated that listen, and that's what participatory grant making is about. I was humbled and challenged by the community there to hear what they need before I come in with my knowledge and my resources. Even as someone with roots from Zimbabwe, I was challenged by that community to engage in a more participatory approach. So that approach is, first of all, built on trust. And it challenges philanthropists, to really look at their unconscious bias. Because sometimes when you have the resources and the power, you believe you have the knowledge and know how it works best. So it starts with trusting that the people who are impacted by these issues, despite the degrees that we may have, the capital that we may have, that they know best. They are the experts. And taking that approach to humility, that we're learning from each other. They're not learning from us. We're not just learning from there, but there's a learning exchange approach. And when you have that approach in learning together on how can we best support this issue? How can we move the needle? And then strategies are co-created. We're not coming in with, our CEO or co-chairs have come up with this vision of the next 5 years. We're actually taking the vision from the people who are doing the work. That is what participatory grant making, it's letting go of our visions, letting go of the control factor and bringing in the voice of the people in determining the strategies to support them, the strategies to serve their communities. In addition to that, I've also worked in traditional philanthropic settings where it's us from the global north who are picking who deserves the funding. But the participatory grant making approach gives that agency to the people who are on the ground, who are in those communities, to actually self-determine. It's a self-determination approach of actually giving them agency to look into their communities, supporting with them with the resources. Sometimes they might not know, but giving them those resources to say, in your community, in your movement, conduct a landscape assessment, conduct a desk review, not that we're conducting from the global north, but we're equipping them, we're share skills transfer. We're transferring the skills on how they can identify the gaps. They already know, but we're sharing our skills. And when we do that, they're learning, identifying gaps on their own, not us articulating what are the gaps, not us selecting who are the actors that that should be supported. They're selecting the actors. And traditional grant making is all about, the funders, the philanthropists, actually determining who gets the resources. But it's shifting that grant making, decision making to the people that are being supported. And it addresses the power dynamics that I keep mentioning, that top-down approach, and makes it a more collaborative approach, incorporating the voice, the strategies of the people, even determining how much and how long, giving that agency to the people to decide. And then also being generous. I want to emphasize skills sharing. Sometimes we want to keep the skills, the knowledge to ourselves, but participatory is also being generous with the skills that we know, the systems, the technology, methodologies, the technical competencies, and also sharing those skills in a participatory grant-making approach and enabling the actors to act independently, but supporting them as well.
Thank you so much, Rufaro, for sharing and really driving home the absolute need to center people, to center their expertise, those with whom we are partnering in friendship and in solidarity and in collaboration, centering their experience, their expertise, their voices, their needs, their power. I personally, I couldn't agree with you more, and thank you for driving this home so powerfully. We have a couple of questions from the audience. Before I turn to those, several of those are building actually on some of the comments that have been made by our panelists. Before we turn to those in maybe 4 minutes or so, I would like to ask to do a lightning round. And I would like to ask Rufaro, if I may lead off with you again. Very brief answer. As a frontline fundraiser, what advice do you have for others in your shoes?
I would say, number one, be passionate. Don't take this as just a profession to get a paycheck. Care about the people. I'll stop there and pass it on to my other colleagues.
Passion, absolutely. Thank you, Rufaro. KD, how have you adjusted your approaches in a post-Dobbs world? And how are you attracting attention to gender justice, especially in underfunded areas?
Yeah. So, you know, it's an all hands on deck situation. I think right now we're creating framework that highlights the intersection of abortion rights with economic justice, with tech, with platform accountability and corporate accountability, because it's really not a single issue. If anything, being in this post-Dobbs decision, you know, we need to fight back more than ever, because we know that the fight to regain our reproductive justice and reproductive rights is going to be a long one. And in terms of underfunded areas, you know, one of the greatest obstacles to gender justice is the proliferation of white supremacist and misogynistic hate speech across the internet, and of course enabled by social media, business models, and reinforced by mainstream media, unfortunately. And we can't have a functioning democracy without gender and racial equity, and we can't achieve equity when social media platforms provide the tools to white supremacists and misogynists that threaten the lives in real life of women leaders, and it undermines everybody's safety. So right now we're working a lot on gendered disinformation. It is a sorely underfunded area. So I urge all of you to check out the Women's Disinformation Defense Project and just gender disinformation overall, because it's going to play a big role in the midterms coming up this year. And then also, of course, signaling to 2024. We're already seeing attacks you know, of just BIPOC women leaders and candidates. There's already narrative starting around questioning election results, and they haven't even happened yet. You know, we're seeing record turnout. So I would just say that is being sorely underfunded right now. There's not a lot of orgs also doing gender disinformation here in the US. It's like a few of them. So I just implore you to research it, look into it, and you know, fund it if you can.
Thank you so much, Katie, for flagging that for us. Digital security and, you know, being more aware of digital disinformation and its pernicious impact in promoting election lies and in misogyny and white supremacy. You know, we may be aware of it, but it is the areas in which we can actually counteract these abuses of, you know, the World Wide Web are woefully underfunded. And Katie, if I may ask you, you mentioned the Women's Disinformation
Defense Project. So we actually have, I can drop a link in the chat. It's called the Disinformation Station, and you can go on there and there's like media guides. We've been working with the like newsrooms to kind of, you know, inoculate the press and give them guidelines around doing, you know, reporting that isn't disinformation, because the wild thing for me is like, mainstream media is adding to the disinformation and misinformation out there. So like, how did we get to a space where you'll have like CNN, you know, spouting dis and misinformation? It's like, it's super wild. So there's a lot of resources on that website as far as, you know, individuals learning how to spot and not reshare disinfo and misinfo from the individual level, but then also resources for nonprofits and resources for the media as well.
Fantastic. Katie, if you would be willing to share the link with us so we can amplify their work and share the resources for resistance, that would be fabulous. Thank you so much, Katie. Wendy, as a nonprofit executive, what do you wish all nonprofit leaders in this space knew about the work?
How important it is to be able to manage change and how the landscape is changing. An example of that would be, you know, the pandemic and women falling out of the labor market at a rate of what it looked like in 1987. And all of this work of everyone on this webinar today, you know, unraveled overnight. And we had to quickly pivot and put new strategies in place on what we were going to do to support women economically. I would also say, you know, with the recession kind of hovering, it again underscores the point of change management being an absolute priority for nonprofit leaders today, to be able to manage and be flexible, to be able to pivot with strategies, to be able to continue to advance missions forward.
Thank you so much, Wendy, for sharing these thoughts. How important it is to invest in change and to bring about change, sustainable change. And last but not least, Françoise, would you share with us, having been on the funder side, you know, so you have worked on both sides, what advice would you have for organizations approaching foundations for support? Best practices.
Well, I would say you have to bring some stories of your work. I think narrative is something that is utilized, I would say, across the board, both in fundraising, but also in change. And it's very powerful because, you know, the research shows that people don't remember facts and figures very much, but they remember stories. And once you tell a compelling story, then they'll remember the facts around it. So I would say often feminist groups are too busy doing the work in managing the multiple crises and don't develop that narrative and those stories and those crisp points that, of course, they know. I mean, that's their daily work. But taking the time to actually bring that to donors and to also your communications work is very, very critical. And it sings. I mean, when you hear some of the stories of what women's groups have been able to do, it just blows you away.
Absolutely, Françoise. So the ability to tell a story, to sell your story in a very effective manner, powerful communication skills, and not getting bogged down, you know, even though, you know, we all are every day, you know, dealing with the minutia of management. So not losing sight of kind of the bigger picture that we're, you know, trying to paint, if you will. What a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much all for sharing. Now we have, as you can see in our Q&A, some wonderful questions from the audience, and we have about 5 minutes to address some of them. I would love, and I'm going to look at you, Françoise, now, because you have worked with the International Women's Health Coalition as well, and others, please do chime in. But the first question, which in parentheses is also very near and dear to my heart. How has the overturning of Roe versus Wade in the US impacted reproductive rights and/or funding for abortions in other countries that receive funding from US organizations? So what are the ripple effects of the Dobbs decision?
Yeah, I've asked that question to women's groups working on abortion abroad. And there's two things they're pointing to. I mean, it's still a little early to get the full sense of how this is going to play out. But one is that it is emboldening anti-abortion right-wingers in their own country, for sure, because then, you know, they say, look, it's a controversial issue. Look, in the US, they just decided it's not a constitutional right. So that's very, very unhelpful, obviously. and is making it harder to make the case for abortion as a human right, which it of course is. The second thing is that this has led US donors to retrench and focus on US domestic issues, and they want to fund, of course, the provision of abortion in states that are now, forbidding abortion, and how do we get people to move across the country, etc. A lot of focus on service delivery, as well as efforts to defend abortion rights in places where litigation can still be useful. So that's, of course, not going to be helpful to those groups abroad that were counting on US donors who may be retrenching.
Thank you, Françoise, for sharing. So encouraging donors and funders not to just focus on the United States, but, keeping in mind the ripple effects of the Dobbs decision. Thank you for sharing, Françoise. Rufaro, may I direct the next question to you, please? As fundraisers and nonprofit leaders, is there anything we should be learning from feminist movements abroad to inform our coalition building and fundraising efforts here in the US around abortion access or beyond? I added the and beyond.
I think one of the greatest lessons that we can learn from movements abroad is how they navigate the opposition. They tend to have even a more fierce opposition than ours, and are operating in states where there's not as much as democracy. I mean, we do have a flawed democracy in the United States of America, but you cannot compare it to places like Benin or even Kenya, where women movement actors are actually making progress. So I think one of the greatest lessons we can learn is how do we navigate the opposition. And I would say that this is something that we have discussed in many convenings on advancing women's rights, is sometimes as nonprofits organization, as philanthropists, we're very educated. And so we speak in language that is so sophisticated and that the regular person might not even understand what we're talking about. So there needs to be more effort from us and learnings from women in other countries, how they've been able to shift the hearts and the minds of those religious fundamentalists, and keeping it simple in a way that the community can relate to them. At times, I feel like our feminist movements in the global north can be unrelatable to, like, let's say, a person in the Midwest or in the South of the United States. We are very disconnected to the people, and that makes it hard for the movements in the Northern Hemisphere to shift minds and change hearts. So really taking an approach in understanding and connecting with the grassroots. That's how the Trump election was effective. He was able to shift the hearts and the minds, and he kept it very simple to where a middle class or lower class person can relate to. And I believe there's an opportunity from us in the global north to learn from other movements and take that approach.
Oh, such brilliant advice. Thank you so much, Rufaro, and also heartening it's doable. We can do it. I would now like to ask the next question, or direct the next question from our wonderful audience to Wendy, which is in kind of a way, it's a shoot off of the previous one. What steps should we take as fundraisers to make sure we are engaging more women in investing in our missions? Wendy.
One thing that we learned through our research is that women want to be asked to serve and tend to hold back. And we find this true in the fundraising capacity. So really taking the initiative to reach out and invite potential and prospective donors to give to the organization. One strategy that's been effective for us is collaborating. So reaching out to organizations that have women as part of their membership of underrepresented communities, and engage them to get to know our mission, do something jointly together, then invite them to join us in the effort and become a donor of our organization.
Fantastic advice. Thank you so much for sharing, Wendy. We have only about 1 minute left, so I would like now to turn to Katie and ask her if she could address Kimberly's question, the second portion. Participatory grant making is an important concept in bringing in different voices to who gets to decide where assets are allocated. However, how do you ensure equity in this process? And Kimberly shares, I have seen institutions where those community members participating in the grant making process prioritize their friends and pass on impactful projects. Hi, Kimberly. Hi, Isabella. Good to see you. Thank you for joining.
You know, I think this is where, going back to what Rufaro said, lifting up community needs and really centering those community needs and making sure that nepotism really isn't part of that process. I think like once you get to the point where you are there to serve the people and serve the community and really have an understanding of what those needs are by eliminating the barriers to access, I think is a huge thing also with the participatory grant making process. You know, oftentimes we do speak in academic language and while I was in Hawaii, I was part of a project called the Ho'owai Fund, which really looked at, you know, kind of shifting the philanthropy that was happening there to a more participatory grant making process that was really focused on like community needs that were being identified by Kanaka Maoli or Native Hawaiians in Hawaii. So I think also a different part of that is really going to the most impacted community members, honoring people and place, and making sure that when you are setting your guidelines for, you know, what the priorities are, what the issues are that you are going to tackle, that they're really, really based in undoing the historical harm and really going back to, you know, kind of filtering out all of the pillars that have been created through our foundations and the philanthropic process. And I think that's a way that you can get away from the nepotism. And of course, making sure, another thing that we did there was making sure that the community input and like an advisory board or however you want to structure it is really representative of everybody in the community, not just those that are, you know, the same 5 people that you see speaking out at, you know, different panels or different community members. I think really making sure that your process is diversified and that the people that are not commonly in the room have a seat at the table, and building that longer table is how you can kind of short circuit that.
Thank you so much, Katie, for this very actionable and tangible and very powerful and also very straightforward and simple advice. Which brings us now to the end of our wonderful conversation. An hour has passed. Time flies when you have fun. I wanted to thank now our 4 amazing panelists, Rufaro, Wendy, Katie, and Françoise, for sharing your incredible insights and expertise and passion with us. If we could sum up our conversation in a couple of words, the need for transnational solidarity, the need for centering, or the need to center the voices, experiences, and power of the communities that we are working with. Playing the long game, not asking, you know, or not expecting immediate impact, even though of course that would be good. Participating actively in civil society and in the voting process, and crafting, you know, tying it back to what Françoise said earlier, a powerful narrative that really resonates with funders, with philanthropists, the centrality of gender equity really for prosperity and for peace domestically as well as globally, and goodness knows that's, you know, that is what we need more of, you know, right now. So a warm thank you to our wonderful audience, and I'm applauding here because I don't have the little reaction button here on my computer. I wanted to thank the audience for the wonderful questions, and thank you for so many of our CGA alumna and alumni for joining the conversation today and for asking questions. We will be sending out a recording of this conversation along with links to the resources that have been mentioned and the websites that have been mentioned by our wonderful panelists. So you will have it in your inbox probably within the next week or so. Michelle and Bianca will send those out. And I hope hope to welcome all of you, both our wonderful panelists, as well as you and the audience, to another one of our conversations about how to bring about gender equity and a much more gender equal society in this country and around the world very, very soon. And until then, stay safe and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye. Bye.